Diversity's Black Lives Matter inspired BGT dance routine has become the most complained about moment on television so far this year. And for a few years, I imagine, with more than 21,000 complaints.
Well, the group is now set to star in a one-off Britain's Got Talent Christmas special, along with some of the other show's other most successful acts.
So, the question is Saturday night entertainment the place for political statements? Joining us, David Grant, who is a vocal coach and singer, who says politics and entertainment have always gone hand in hand, and political commentator Calvin Robinson, who says this issue is too complex for a 4-minute dance routine. So welcome to you both. Calvin, you agree that perhaps they were biting off more than they could chew, but to have so many complaints, as Ashley Banjo suggests, is a little bit more than a critique, isn't it? There's something rather nasty going on here.
I think it's making a statement, isn't it? Because, first of all, I'm a big fan of diversity. I remember when they won, and it was a great moment when we were a lot younger. But I think what they tried to do was well-intentioned, but very misguided. And the British public have said, you know what, we don't want this. It was pre-Watershed. It was very violent. It was, portraying police brutality and the kneeling on necks and taking the knee, this subjugation. It was all steeped in critical race theory, essentially, which is, this whole myth of white supremacy and white people being oppressors and black people being victims. It's not a good message to be sending at 8 o'clock on a in primetime television.
Oh, come off it. I've seen more violence on EastEnders. Honestly, what they were doing, they did a 4-minute performance that talked about the coronavirus pandemic, about love, about unity, and in part of it, they depicted the seminal moment, apart from the virus of the year, which was the appalling death of George Floyd at the knee of a police officer. I think if you're genuinely offended by what you saw on that show, there's something wrong with you. Not you personally, although if you were offended, I would include you. It's like, I just feel like, what are you offended by, if you think about it logically? They were depicting a real event in which we all watched a man die for 8.5 minutes. This is something all the kids watching would have known about. Their parents certainly knew about it. And when you say Britain rejected this and protested, only 20,000 people, actually, have bothered to protest. The show was watched by over 5 million.
But you can't have it both ways and say only this many people protested and then say, actually, it's the most protested TV programme in a long time.
You can. It can be both. It was the most protested about show in terms of Ofcom complaints, but I'm on about 15 of the Ofcom top 50 for shouting at government ministers. Doesn't mean I was wrong, does it?
Well, for me, it's not that they highlighted Black Lives Matter. It's they seem to promote it with the kneeling and the chanting and the fist pumping and all of this. They're promoting Black Lives Matter.
Which bit did you personally take exception to? I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, I do take exception to it because it's a far-left organisation.
No, which bit? Which bit were you personally offended by?
I was personally offended by them promoting Black Lives Matter to young people on national television.
But there are two aspects to
racial tensions.
Right, but there are two aspects to Black Lives Matter. One is an organisation called Black Lives Matter, which does have some policies which I personally don't agree with, defunding the police and abandoning capitalism and so on. But they're an organisation. But there's also, as you know, there's a hashtag movement, Black Lives Matter, which has gone around the world, which simply denotes, if you support it, that you support racial equality and an end to racial injustice. And I'm struggling to understand what part of that diversity performance actually offended you, given that we all know that Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, that's what it stands for.
But I think you're compartmentalising this hashtag and the movement. It is all one thing. And if you're promoting it, you're promoting the idea that we should see everything through the eyes of racism.
Calvin, I don't think that people do conflate the two. I mean, some people may, and some people, when they hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, might think of a particular group with particular political aims. But I think most people understand that there's something very powerful and important in the phrase Black Lives Matter, which came into its own this year.
Even the phrase itself is troublesome, isn't it? I would say that all lives matter, all lives are sacred. To kind of say that Black Lives Matter is separating people out by the colour of their skin, that's not what we want to do.
Well, let me finish the sentence for you, which is Black Lives Matter as much as white lives. Is actually
Who would say they don't, Piers? I don't know anyone
I think it's inarguable that if you look at racial injustice around the world, it is inarguable that the criminal justice system in America, for example, which caused George Floyd to die, is skewed against black people in a way it's not against white people.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've lived out there for years. It's inarguable.
This is the most diverse, tolerant and inclusive nation in the world. This is a fantastic place to live. We don't live in America, Piers. You know, Black Lives Matter is a different thing over there. It's very violent. There are riots, there are
Black Lives Matter in this country?
I don't think we need to bring that drama over here. We need to look at the Martin Luther King approach of being colourblind and seeing people for the content of the character, not the colour of their skin.
Well, that's great. That's great, right to the point that they get discriminated against because of the colour of their skin. Let me bring it's an interesting debate. Let's bring in David Grant. David, I guess there's a wider issue here. I mean, part of what Calvin was saying is that it's too complex an issue to deal with in a performance. But there's a wider issue whether BGT, which is a big family entertainment show, should be at that time of night on a Saturday when the kids are all watching, should they be doing such a sort of, you know, charged performance? I think they should, but what do you think?
I think it's always been the role of art throughout history to be able to speak about many things, about love, about hopes, about dreams, but also about the current political, social, economic situations, whatever, that people are actually walking through in their real everyday lives. It's not just make-up, fantasy and pie in the sky. The fact of the matter is, if you're doing a dance piece that's themed around 2020, and you're speaking about the coronavirus, the recalibration of the family, which was a big feature of it, you know, with even the little boy at the end saying, why did it take a sickness for people to come together? The idea of it was supposed to be, look at how 2020 has changed us. If you're going to do that and you're going to leave out Black Lives Matter, which is the most significant and talked about social movement, whether you like it or not, of 2020, then you're deliberately editing out reality. And it's not the role of art to edit out reality.
David, people might agree that art often is provocative and it's often political. But they might also think a Saturday night entertainment show is not the stage for that sort of art. And what would you say to that?
I hear you, Susanna. I think if people look at it as a 4-minute piece, which it was, in 240 seconds, for 8 seconds, they depicted a police officer with his knee on someone's neck. If for 8 seconds out of 240 seconds, you're going to dismiss the whole thing because you don't like those 8 seconds, or you're uncomfortable with those 8 seconds, or you don't agree that those 8 seconds should even be significant, then you're completely missing the point, which is they are significant. And I think that Piers just illustrated really well in response to Calvin in saying, look, all lives can't matter until the lives of the least, the most oppressed, the most put upon matter. And for Calvin to say, well, that doesn't happen here, is a denial of reality. So, yeah, you know what? People are saying things like, kids shouldn't be forced to watch this. Let me tell you something. The majority of the kids who watch it have seen the George Floyd video because it's all over social media. I would contest that the majority of the adults who complained haven't actually sat through watching all 8 minutes of it.
I actually think that's the point, Calvin. I think most of the 20,000 who actually bothered to complain to Ofcom, I very much doubt most of them actually watched the performance. I bet if you asked them what was actually in it, I bet they would struggle to answer.
I love that people don't agree with me, so they mustn't have understood it or they mustn't have watched it.
No, actually, I don't agree with that general view. I think that we're having a respectful debate now, and I listened to what you've had to say. I'm putting to you a sequence of experience.
People are saying,
well, let me base it on my own experience. I'm basing it on my own experience of Ofcom protests. When we were going after government ministers so aggressively, they've been boycotting us now since April. There were Ofcom, hundreds and thousands of Ofcom complaints about me, day in, day out. And yet I could tell from Twitter that many of the people complaining hadn't actually watched the interviews. So I've been in the very position that I think Diversity and I found themselves in. And I have to say, Calvin, I've also been repulsed by the racial nature of a lot of the stuff I'm seeing on social media in relation to this and the disgusting abuse that Ashley Banjo in particular has had for what I think was a powerful and courageous performance. That's unacceptable.
Of course.
Yeah, Piers, can I...
Well, let Calvin respond first.
And I can completely relate. I've experienced quite a lot of racism myself too, especially since this Black Lives Matter movement took off, which is why I'm so against it, because it is stoking up racial tensions where they didn't really exist to begin with. There are elements of racism in this country that we need to stamp out. But while we're seeing everything as racist, we're kind of undermining those actual racial issues that we need to address. And that's what BLM is all about. It's critical race theory. That's why I don't like
Do you believe, Calvin, in your heart, do you believe in this country, tolerant though it is, certainly by comparison to many other countries, do you believe that there is genuine racial equality across the board for black people in this country?
I think everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in this country. Absolutely. It's a fantastic place to live, which is why I live here. You know, it's a great place. I don't think we need to kind of say it's a racist country or there's institutional racism or anything like that. There are elements of racism that we need to address and we need to stamp out, but we're not on the same level as America. It's completely different over there.
The majority of football stars in the Premier League are black. How many black chairmen or owners or managers of Premier League clubs are there currently?
Well, even the Premier League are saying, look, we're not going to use Black Lives Matter as a slogan anymore.
No, I'm just asking you, I'm asking you a factual question. You say there's equal opportunities. I'm just saying that in a sport now dominated by brilliant young black players, how many owners, chairmen and managers in the Premier League are actually black?
But you're talking about equal outcomes, not equal opportunities.
No, I'm talking about the lack. I'm actually suggesting there's a lack of opportunity, a lack of equality, because otherwise there would be, in a sport now dominated by black players, there would be black owners, chairmen and managers, and there aren't any. And my point is that is unequal. And it's that kind of thing that may not be overt racism, but subliminally we have a long way to go, right, David?
I totally agree. I mean, Calvin, I completely respect your right to have your own opinion, but nobody can have their own facts. And the fact is that black kids are 7 times more likely to be stopped by the police, twice as likely to be given custodial sentences for the same offence, 3 times more likely to be thrown out of school and excluded. These things exist. Legislation says we're all equal. The administration of legislation is not equal. And so people who have come up and said, this is wrong, have highlighted something that probably the majority of people, because they're not affected by it, weren't even aware of. So for you to say it's caused racism, it hasn't. What it's done is it has brought to light stuff that's been hiding in a dark corner, and people who don't like what they're seeing are objecting to it.
Yeah, and I think that's what Ashley Banjo was absolutely trying to encapsulate.
And I don't think it's incompatible to say that you can have concerns about the Black Lives Matter organisation, which has a lot of political views, which you may not agree with, but that the hashtag Black Lives Matter, which actually is short for Black Lives Matter as much as anybody else's, really, is what it means. If you can't sign up to that, then you're part of the problem. Anyway, look, it's a very interesting debate. Calvin, David, thank you both very much for coming on the programme. We appreciate it.